So about 15 years ago, close to, a friend of a friend invited me to speak about my book in New York City. And I got invited then to meet Rabbi Brad Hirschfield, who also, a book was just coming out, great title, You Don't Have to Be Wrong for Me to Be Right. Finding Faith Without Fanaticism. And there began a companionship, part of what my language for has been a companionable way. And so the pieces, there's the too many pieces to name, but to give you a sense of why it's really significant for him to be here, and it's really significant for the work that is growing in between all of us in this covenantal belonging, this covenantal journey together. He came to teach at my seminary. He came to be a part of a theological diversity plenary in a week that it was evangelism week at the seminary. I didn't know that. So that was particularly challenging for me because all of the billboards said, offer them Christ. And I'm bringing my rabbi friend, Brad, into an environment like that. But our companionship has really grown, deepened. He and his community have sort of adopted Brian and me as they observe Shabbat, as we've visited for Purim, as we've been at their place for Pesach. He was willing to go on a trip to the Holy Land, Israel, Palestinian territories that he didn't really want to go on at first, and then but came because there was an opening of work that I really needed his balancing perspective on, and he was willing. We have walked together, even into the belly of the beast of our history, by companioning one another at Yad Vashem in Israel, which is the Holocaust Museum. And we have been in communion with one another after that, as we've reflected and in some sense ritually observed reflection time such that we can all say L'chaim again on the other side. But the thing that I want to honor and lift up as why it's really significant to have him be a part of this is that he's probably, of all of the companionships that have blessed my life, as I've learned and leaned into interreligious and intercultural teaching and learning, he's probably the only one who has been with me at the center of my faith in a Eucharistic service that I was afraid he wasn't going to be able to participate, and I was so sad because he wasn't going to receive the elements. And when I went up to receive the elements and then came back and I saw him in such a posture of prayer, it was so obvious he was so clearly with me. He was so clearly with us. And so there is this trust that has grown and deepened between us. It like breathes between us. And it continues to get bigger, and it continues to develop, even when I disappoint him or let him down, or when he disappoints me, lets me down. And so there is this beautiful invitation to the covenantal belonging that is so much bigger than we know it to be in our categories and in our pieces. And that is the journey that I think Spirit is inviting us into with covenant renewal, with where we are in our country today. So I'd like to simply say also, it's really cool that he's the president of the Center of Learning and Leadership in New York City, which is sort of a Jewish think tank bringing Jewish wisdom to the world. And he's a well-known speaker, travels all over the world. But for us and for our time here to share and worship together, he is dear Rabbi Brad. Thank you for being here.
And my dear friend Brad, who taught me that our belonging in God transcends even our boundaries of religion. And I'd ask Brad in just a moment to share with us, both from the depths of and even beyond our own tradition, how covenant is not merely embedded in, but shapes our very notion of relationship itself. Y'all have all helped teach me, knowingly or not, by and through the Spirit, how to trust, how to open my heart. And in doing so, you've not just brought us closer together, but you've brought us closer to God. That's what covenant does. It both binds us to God, and as we practice it in the messy particularity of our lives, it generates first within us, and then in those spaces in between us, new life. You can learn information about God all on your own, but you can only learn to trust with other people. And the only way into deeper participation with God is through that same trust. So please, join, share, pray, participate, attend, grow, live together. We already know the remedy for our culture's toxic individualism and secularism and meaninglessness. It's us together with God and with each other, because ultimately that is what salvation promises. That is what covenant promises. Belonging together.
Note to self in front of all of you. Follow Brian at your own peril. Brian has described brilliantly this morning covenant as a plan. I want to build on that for a few moments by suggesting to all of us that not only is covenant a plan, it is a methodology for perfecting our shared world. Part of that methodology is gratitude. And so I begin with gratitude, yes, to God, but most immediately this morning, I begin with gratitude to all of you. There's nothing obvious about celebrating 10 years of religious, spiritual, intellectual, and institutional leadership by having a rabbi come to your church. The fact that I have been welcomed as warmly as I have been is actually not about me. It is about a capacity that all of you have to reach for your best self by going beyond your most obvious understanding of self. The fact is, no time in our lives has invited that more of each of us. Whatever faith we follow, whatever voting button we push, whatever state we live in. And so my faith and my hope, and this is entirely selfish on my part, is completely affirmed by your graciousness, by your hospitality. And so I begin by saying thank you to all of you. I also want to say thank you to Lisa. Most of us would do well if we could just see things the way they are. Lisa Hess tends to see things not only as they are, but as they could be. And that is a remarkable capacity. And without that capacity, I wouldn't be here this morning. In the distant sense of some years ago dragging me on a trip, she's not exaggerating, I really didn't want to go on. And clearly because God, among other things, has a remarkable sense of humor, got me to go. But even the orchestrating of everything that went into this morning, and everything it means, and the seeds that it plants and how they will sprout, is because you see things not only as they are, but as they can be. And I thank you. And I promised Brian that I would stretch the limits of his tolerance for what I wanted to say to and about him. I won't violate them, but I'm going to stretch them. No, it's okay. Rabbinic tradition has a mandate. Aseh lecha rav ukneh lecha chaver. Make for yourself a teacher and acquire for yourself a friend. But it's not just a friend, it's a colleague, it's a creative partner. Everyone in this room needs both of those people in our lives, friends and teachers. What the rabbis do not demand, because it's very rare, is to find in a single person one who is both. Without exaggeration, I can say that in you, I have found one who is both. A compelling, enlightening, wise, and noble teacher, and a friend and partner in thought and in spirit that I know I don't deserve, but for which I am endlessly grateful. And the beautiful thing about saying that to him in this place is that what I just said is true for everyone in this room. We have all found in you a friend and a teacher. And not only those of us in this room, and not only those of us watching online, but because of the journeys we have taken, the hundreds of religious leaders and the thousands of people who look to them for guidance and who guide and who are themselves friends, who are themselves teachers, following in your model. And all of that is part of covenantal method. It really is a way of transforming ourselves and transforming the world. And you live it so much that even in unanticipated ways, it just keeps coming up. So last night, late at night, after Brian and Lisa dragged themselves to the airport in Columbus to fetch me at about 11:30, we're standing on the steps as I'm going to bed and he's going to bed. And I comment how exciting it is to be celebrating this accomplishment. And Brian says, yeah, it's really not about me. He says it's really all about the years of coming through pandemic and being with and for one another as a community. And it's not that he's wrong. It's one of those both and deals. It is about you and it's about that understanding of community. But the essence of covenant is what he was saying last night at the top of the stairs. To be in covenant means there is no me that is not part of a larger we. It simply doesn't exist. Now, in Jewish life, that usually comes up as covenant, coming up with Abraham's covenant, which inescapably does involve circumcision. You're allowed to laugh or shudder, as you will. As it happens, I have 3 daughters, so I got to dodge the whole thing. But the truth is, whether it is practiced physically or not, the wisdom of embodying circumcision, as we find in Genesis 17, can't be lost on any of us. Our bodies are gifts of God. Jewish bodies, Christian bodies, Muslim bodies, secular bodies, American bodies, Vietnamese bodies, it doesn't matter. They are gifts of God. And when it comes to covenanting, God turns to a human, God being God, and humans being humans, he says, oh, by the way, this magnificent thing I've given you, your body, it could use a tune-up. It's really quite amazing that even that which we receive from God needs our ongoing work and participation. Dare I say it, our partnership with God. And if that message isn't obvious to Abraham, the day of circumcision is the 8th day. As if God is saying, I took care of the first 7, don't worry. Now you go to work on the 8th. We are all partners. in the ongoing act of creation, then as now. Because that eighth day keeps coming up. And we are absolutely, each of us, in all of our frailties and imperfections, gifts of God to the world and to each other. And there's still work to do. And that work is our work. Covenant is a partnership. And we need each other in that work. And it's not just that we need each other, we need each other. Stop and think for a minute. Who is most other to you? And no, I'm not going to invite responses. Who is most other to you? And really, if you want, close your eyes and picture an actual person. You can't get it wrong, and no one's going to put you on the spot. Who is most other to you? And now imagine really needing them. And it's really not so far-fetched. After all, if God made each of us and still needs us to continue the perfecting process, how could we not need all those others? That's covenant. To really trust that we need each other in an ongoing act, not just of recreation, but of extending creation, of being partners in creation. But the fact is, covenant didn't begin with Abraham. It began with Noah. Because covenant is not a Jewish thing. In fact, I hope I won't offend anyone, covenant is not a Jewish or a Christian thing. Covenant is a human thing, which is why we're introduced to it in Genesis 9 with someone who is neither a Christian nor a Jew. He was just Noah, and he had been through a lot. But the truth of the matter is, without any self-pity, there isn't a person in this room who hasn't been through a lot. The question is, what do we want to do with the lot we've been through? And the response, having been through that lot, is covenant. God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." By the way, same lines from the beginning of Genesis. Here we go again, God is saying, which, by the way, is a remarkable promise that whatever you've been through, you can go again. That is part of covenant's promise to us. The fear and dread of you shall rest upon every animal of the earth and every bird of the air, on everything that creeps on the ground, and on all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And just as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. This is a big departure. Until this moment, said this vegetarian, human beings were vegetarian. Now God says, I guess I too have some fine-tuning to do. And I want you to go out there, and if you want to, enjoy a steak. You can eat meat. But note, immediately upon the permission to eat meat, only you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is blood. For your own lifeblood I will surely require a reckoning. From every animal I will require it. From every human being, each one the blood of the other, I will require reckoning of human life. Covenant is a partnership that creates opportunities. And it also creates new obligations. Obligations without opportunities equals oppression. Opportunities without obligations creates chaos. Covenant unleashes new human power through and with God, to be sure, but new human power, new responsibilities, and yes, even new limitations. We become more fully ourselves in covenant, in relationship, It's not some act of kindness. It's actually the pinnacle of enlightened self-interest. Abraham and Sarah are more Abraham and Sarah in covenant. Noah and Mrs. Noah are more who they are in covenant. We are more who we are meant to be in covenant, in relationship, and that includes what we do and what we refrain from doing. Now, I can't pretend to tell you what the right response in every moment is, but imagine if the people who championed restraint also began to champion the unleashing of new possibilities. And if the people most excited about new possibilities often began to question, where's the place for restraint in my life? Where is the obligation to make room for the one who I truly regard as other? Not because I suddenly stopped thinking of them as an other. No, they're really other. And they're really part of the deal. They are part of the covenant that we are all called to. The one thing I can tell you about entering into that is that it has to be done freely. Then Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they took their stand beneath the mountain, says Exodus 19. The sages in rabbinic literature are curious about that language. What do you mean, beneath the mountain? Which is quite literally what the Hebrew says. Tachtit hahar, underneath the mountain. What were they doing underneath the mountain? How could that possibly, at the edge of the mountain, at the foot of the mountain, at the base of the mountain? I get all that. Underneath the mountain? And the rabbis say, that's actually how we know that just prior to revelation at Mount Sinai, God lifted Sinai above the Israelites and said to them, I am about to give you my covenant, and if you accept it, well and good, and if not, I'm going to drop the mountain on you. No one questions the story. Now, that might make you think, wow, those rabbis were idiots. But okay, that's a separate issue. No one questions the veracity of that story. No one suggests that when Exodus says underneath the mountain, it doesn't mean underneath the mountain. No one suggests that God was not a God who lifted the mountain over hundreds of thousands of human beings and said, here's the covenant. You like it? Great. If not, squat. No, instead what they say is, if that story happened that way, Mod'a Rabbah le'oraita, speaking in Aramaic, the language of Jesus, and they say, if that's how it went down at Mount Sinai, that story is a fundamental claim against all of Scripture. That's big words. If that's how it happened, then the Bible has no claim on us. And no one objects to that objection. They all say, essentially, through their silence, you're right. If the covenant was created through coercion, it is no covenant at all. So the rabbis say, since we all agree, when was the moment of finally accepting the covenant? And they say, oh yeah, that happened in the book of Esther. By the way, that's 1,000 years after Moses. And by the way, the only book in the Hebrew Bible in the Old Testament in which God does not appear. Talk about loving us enough to step back. The book in which the rabbis come to understand we freely accept covenant is the book in which God says, no, I don't need to appear. You need to appear. You need to answer that call. And they say, well, where did it happen? Oh, at the end of the story when Mordecai says to the Jews of the world, you should uphold this wonderful event. And it says they upheld and accepted that which they were invited to do. And that's when the covenant was really accepted. 1,000 years later. Now, does that mean that the Israelites lived with no covenant for the intervening 1,000 years? Of course not. What it means is the covenant is continually renewed. It was renewed from the time of Moses to the time of Esther. It was renewed from the time of Esther to the sages and the time of Jesus and his disciples. It is renewed here and now. Covenant means commitment without coercion. And to live into that is to live into the method which we have been gifted to perfect ourselves and our world.